How much is too much for a can't-miss waiver wire pick? What should Richard Rodriguez owners do in the next week? We will answer these questions, plus a deep dive into the Toronto Blue Jays with 2016 NFBC Main Event overall winner Rob Silver. Beat the Shift is next. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. It is All-Star Week here, and we're doing this show actually right in the middle of the All-Star game, and we brought on an All-Star guest. Welcome, Rob Silver, to the show.
It's great to be back with you guys. It's great to be back on a Fangraphs podcast. I'll be honest, I'm a bit surprised. Paul Sporer swore that I would never be back on another Fangraphs podcast ever again. So I don't know if Paul's asleep or off for the week, but it's great to be back. And Paul said some really hurtful things last time I was on Fangraphs podcast, some anti-Canadian slurs. But it's good to be back with you guys.
Ooh, well, I don't know what happened there, but
I'm joking. Paul and I make fun of each other. It's great to be back with you guys. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, looking forward to this for a while, and thanks for joining. So, before we start our show, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of, how you started playing and where you got into how you're now analyzing fantasy baseball and even doing a podcast of your own on the Launch Angle podcast.
No. So before those questions are not that interesting. Let me ask you, Ariel, two questions. So I was recording the Launch Angle podcast with my co-host Jeff Zimmerman today. And before the show, we were kibitzing. Am I allowed to use Yiddish on this podcast? Is that I should have asked? I should have asked ahead of time.
We'll allow it. It's fine.
We'll allow it. Okay. I didn't know if that's permitted. He mentioned your labor league, Ariel, and he seemed a little bit defensive because my understanding is you have passed him in the standings in labor heading into the All-Star break. Is this true?
This is true, although the way I tell it, I was in first for most of the season. He passed me, and I reclaimed first place from him.
So very quick analysis, and I'm putting you on the spot. This wasn't on the outline. Give me 5 ways that Jeff Zimmerman has blown that labor league. Like, what were the 5 things that Jeff did that have caused him to do this poorly in the league?
It's not that he blew it. It's that our team is just that good. That's
yeah.
I didn't even realize you guys were partners. I apologize.
Yes,
I didn't mean to be in any way dismissive of your contribution. That's how closely I've paid attention to your labor league. No disrespect. But anyways, back to Jeff. If you could focus specifically on how his team has been particularly. Do you have anything negative to say about Jeff's team?
Well, I mean, his power output is not so great. He's got only 3 points in homers, which is why he just traded Kevin Gausman for Yordan Alvarez.
Jesus. Do you think that was an outrageously bad trade by Jeff Zimmerman?
I think that was a little bit too much in desperation to make up what he needed because, he's could lose some points in pitching, so you never know. And my lead, I only have 3 points in wins, and if I had 4 more wins, I'd have 8 more points in the league. So I have a lot of points to gain very quickly, and. Jeff is a fantastic player, so
he is. He knows I joke, and Jeff's having an amazing year in lots of leagues, including partnering with Fred Zinke, who I understand you're doubling up on the Canadians. That's a double, as Canadians like to say. He may be coming on a podcast soon. So my second question, before we head to the actual show. You obviously take your softball very, very seriously, based on your Twitter feed. Be honest, and I know you have no ability to be anything but honest. Have you ever berated your catcher for not framing your screwball properly? Like, have you ever thrown a pitch and just started yelling at your catcher? Like, what was that framing, using expletives that I know I'm allowed to use Yiddish. I won't use any swearing on the podcast. Like, do you like chew out your catcher if he's not doing a proper job framing your pitches? Because you clearly take it very seriously, your softball pitching.
Yeah, I mean, I never got on him for framing. I do get on him sometimes for a foul tip that goes straight back and he misses it, or a quick pop up that he'll miss at home plate. But never on framing. Framing is tough
Do you
in
think?
He's
Spanish
he's
baseball.
he's been he's
But
been
do you
your
think?
pitcher. He's been your catcher for the past 10, 15 years. I mean, what are you
Yeah,
going to
something
yell
like
at him?
Do you
that.
The
think? Do you think?
same
Do you think? Do you,
catcher.
do you think with a better defensive catcher that you like? Have you run the numbers? If you had a better framing catcher in softball, how much better your ERA might be? Because you take it very seriously based on what you tweet out. So I'm just have you run the math? And have you started scouting other softball catchers in your area of who might be able to just make a difference? I'm
Well,
not saying I'm sure your catcher's a really good guy on your softball team, but like look, the math is the math and the numbers are the numbers. Maybe you should find yourself a better framing softball catcher and it could just play up with your screwball that you're throwing right now.
well, the thought has definitely crossed my mind in terms of
So you
how he
have thought
runs.
about it. So you
Yeah,
acknowledge
and
that you have run the numbers.
I'll actually go a step further, and there's one season that he didn't play. It was the season before COVID. Actually, he didn't play
Wow.
for whatever reason. That's the season we won the championship. Actually,
But you're not saying. You're just saying, but you're not saying. Does he listen to this podcast, your catcher? Because this is devastating that
I
you
don't
just
think
pointed
so.
that out. I was just
I
joking,
don't think he
but
does.
but obviously this is really something you've spent a lot of time thinking about.
well, no, I spent some time, but now listen, he's one of my buddies, and
Uh,
I'm glad to pitch to him.
And now you guys understand why Paul Sporer said I would never be allowed on another Finecast podcast ever again. Let's go. Why don't we actually do the podcast that you've proposed that we do based on the outline that you've sent now?
Sounds good, Rob. Great stuff. Now, listen, I play softball often, as you know, and part of it is throwing guys off balance. So you're right, framing matters, and it's a lot of fun to talk about, to think about. Hey, would I have gained 3 runs in on the year? I don't know. Yeah. All good, all good. But anyways, a little bit about you, Rob. So how did you get into this whole
Uh,
fantasy baseball
the
bracket?
honest answer is I grew up in Montreal and I started playing fantasy baseball in like a lot of people of my vintage, which is older, unfortunately, than some people in the hobby. I started playing AL and NL only auctions when I was 13, 14 years old, and it was a totally different world back then. Um, we got the commissioner had to do the stats once. Like now I sound like I'm 100 years old. The commissioner did the stats out of USA Today every Tuesday for NL and Wednesday for AL by hand, and used to fax it out to all the league members. All the other league members, other than me, had jobs and therefore had like their work fax machine that they could get the stats to uh, by fax machine. I don't even know if everybody knows what a fax machine actually is. Um, I was 13 years old at the time playing with grown-ups. So the only way I could get the stats each week was if my mom would drive me out to the league commissioner's house to pick up the stats by hand. And like my mom was working 4 jobs as a single mom, so I'd go a month without any access to the statistics of the league, which, as you can imagine, guys, made doing transactions each week really tough if you're trying to if you're just trying to do it by hand and you had no idea what all the teams had done. So it was just a different time, and I loved it, and it was amazing
Wow.
as kind of different and by today's standards crappy as it was. So that's how I got started. And I did those home leagues, those home auction leagues for a long time. And obviously, eventually, it all went online and kind of more of a similar modern environment. And I've told the story before. I got into the NFBC because then the follow up is, so how did you get into the NFBC? For my 30th birthday, my wife noticed an ad somewhere. I probably had like one of the magazines, as one did back then. sitting around. And for my 30th birthday, she decided this would be a great present for Rob for the two of us, my wife and I. We didn't have any kids back then, to fly out to Vegas and I'll pay his registration to get into this high stakes fantasy baseball. And it was a lot of money, but luckily both of us were already, we were both 30, working, and we could afford it. My wife subscribed me or registered me for my first ever NFBC league as my 30th
Oh,
present.
wow.
And like I picked him good. I married up like lots of us, and that's how I got into the NFBC. And it went horrendously badly. I had no idea what I was doing. Like it was a totally different game. Like anyways. But I was hooked, and it kind of went from there. But that's how I got into it.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. From the time you were 13, your bar mitzvah, and now you're having your mom drive you once a month to get
Oh,
scores. That's
jeez.
incredible.
It was so miserable. Like to get to the auction, I'd have to take like because my mom wouldn't drive me on a Friday or Saturday or Sunday to get to the auction. So I'd have to take like 6 buses to make it to some
Wow.
hotel out in the West Island of you guys are in New York, but like it was a schlep to get there. But it was like it was my bar mitzvah. I was a man. Like it was fun, and I had a paper how so we weren't paying for big money, but it was like $100 entrance fee, which was a lot of money for me at the time. I had a paper route, and I was saving up money all winter to
Wow.
pay my entrance fee into my league to play with these grown-ups. They were probably mid to late 20s, 30s, like they were adults. And I was delivering newspapers in Montreal. It's minus 40 degrees Celsius all winter, just so I could get into a fantasy baseball league with these guys. My God, if you had told me
Wow.
when I was 13 that I'd be on a podcast when I'm not 13 talking about it still, I would have been like, how has my life gone astray?
Well, I mean, certainly you've grown into one of the best, winning the main event in the NFBC, and obviously, great analysis every week. And we're fortunate to have you on the show.
You've run out of guests. You've gone through everybody else, and this is all in the middle of summer on the All-Star day. It's like there's only one person who will say yes at this point. It's Silver.
No, far from that. We haven't even run out of Canadian guests, as you
It's
mentioned.
true. Fred Zinke is still available, as it
That's
turns
right.
out.
There you go. All right. Well, anyways, let's get into it. First, let's talk a little bit about the All-Star game. And before we do that, it's time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
Well, since we're going to talk about the All-Star game a little bit, and Rob, since you grew up in Canada and you mentioned you grew up in Montreal, I'm going to gear this week's trivia to you, actually. How
Oh,
many
jeez.
times did someone playing on a Canadian team be named the MVP of the MLB All-Star game?
I have no idea. My God, I do know because I was looking at this today. I'm not going to answer. You can tell I'm also in politics because I'm not going to answer your question at all. Because there were 3 Blue Jays in the starting lineup today, and obviously Bo Bichette's also on the roster. Do you know that in Montreal in 1983, when the Expos hosted the game, there were 3 Expos in the starting lineup? Plus, Steve Rogers started the game. Maybe one of them was MVP in that game. I don't know.
You are very much on target there. In
Gary Car- Gary
1981
Gary
and 19,
Gary
yes,
Carter.
Gary Carter in
Yeah.
81 and 84,
Wow.
and Tim Raines Sr. in 1987.
Wow.
Really, Tim Raines Jr. never won All-Star Game MVP. Interesting. Tim
Yes.
Raines Jr. never
And
really made an
both
All-Star
of
game.
them playing for the now defunct Montreal Expos and
For
or
now.
Washington Nationals, whatever you want to call them.
For for
Yeah.
for now. For
For
for,
now.
for
For
now.
now.
For now.
For
Yeah.
now.
Yes.
For now.
Yes. We'll see.
It's coming. There's a team in Tampa that may be playing in Montreal very shortly. They have a
Well,
decent
that
team.
was actually the plan to play a couple games in Montreal this year, but because of COVID.
No, not a couple of games. Like their stated plan for Major League Baseball, and it doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it rationally. But they're trying to leverage and get Tampa to build them a new stadium, which I'm fine with as an Expos fan. Is for them to split the team is 40 games in both cities, which is crazy. We'll see how the labor negotiations go next year.
Well, I'm actually old. I'm actually old enough. I've been to a game at the old stadium there at Olympic Stadium, and all I remember is the echo. I actually saw
Yeah.
Hideo Nomo pitch there. There's such a bad echo when Hideo Nomo was pitching. It was so loud. His first year in the league, it was so loud, and the echo. That's one thing I remember is the echo on and on and on.
No doubt. And people who know that the Expos didn't draw a lot of fans, which certainly by the end was very true. When the Expos were good and the stadium would have 40,000 people in it, there is no louder stadium in baseball than Olympic Stadium, in part because they were really good, rowdy Canadian, kind of European soccer type fans, in part because the echo, as you say, was just ridiculous. And like my last year living in Montreal was 1994, and that year broke my heart, and I couldn't watch baseball afterwards. It was devastating. But the 93, 94 Expos were such good teams, and they got such good fan support, and it's a great baseball city in Montreal. That just got beaten down. But I have no doubt that with a good outdoor stadium, that city can support baseball. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes.
And talking a little bit about the All-Star game here, we had last night the Home Run Derby won by our hometown New York Met Pete Alonso, who looked very not modest, very confident, but not the least bit modest. I'll tell you that. And of course, the main story.
It was good to see because Pete's not had since the rookie year. Like it's good to see him be cocky, Pete Alonso, because we haven't seen that a lot in actual baseball. No.
Yeah, and I'll take the cockiness because I think that he performs better under that.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll take that for now. And of course, the other story is Shohei Ohtani, who has just been a beast in fantasy. He's been he's number 2 hitter, a $51 player in a 15-team 5x5 format, 33 homers, 12 stolen bases. He's got 70 RBIs already. And this is Ohtani. He looks like he's not slowing down. There's not much in his profile to suggest that he's slowing down. Maybe a little bit of home run regression, as his homer to fly ball rate is almost 40%. But he looks like he can get to 50 homers. Any thoughts on Ohtani?
He's awesome. Like what do you say? What do you say?
Well put.
He's it's like would you bet against anything with the guy? It's hard to say. Like, of course, rationally you'd say there should be some home run regression, but I don't know. Like the only thing I hope for is health. And I talked about this with Jeff today on the launch angle. Thing is, I worry more about his pitching health still than his hitting health, and he's shown even with pitching health, and we all hope that he stays healthy on the pitching side too, because forget fantasy. Like from a fantasy perspective, in many ways, the pitching is sort of irrelevant because unless you're in a daily transaction league where you can flip him back and forth between hitting and pitching, most weeks you're not using those pitching stats. But as baseball fans, it's so tremendous, and it's such a good story. So I wouldn't bet against anything that Ohtani does the rest of the way.
Yeah. Ruvani, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think he will stay healthy. Even if he hurts himself pitching, he's been shown that even if he doesn't pitch, he'll still hit, and he can hit with he had a bad elbow. He hit pretty well with a bad elbow, so I'm not really concerned about that too much, especially if the Angels stay with a 6-man rotation and spread him out. I'm not really too concerned about injury at this point.
Right. Into our strategy section today, and want to get your take on a couple of topics. As you know, we do on our show, it's not just about the players, it's also about how to play the game, and a lot of times it's more about playing the game. Talking about waiver wire, and a couple weeks ago, Alek Manoah, who is having a fantastic start to his career here, he went on average in FAB in the NFBC main event for $341. That's 34% of your annual budget. The maximum pick that he went at was $538. Somebody bid 538 out of 1,000. Minimum out of any league was 145, so he was a major pick. Now, ignoring the fact that he's done well in his first 8 starts, because obviously it's a rookie, it could go bad, sour, you never know. Do you think that bidding that much, bidding over 300, over 400, some kind of large amount, is that an appropriate purchase price? Do you think that that's way too high? Is that appropriate? Does it matter your position in the league if you're in first place, if you're in last place, if you're really tight in the categories? Well, what's your take on the kind of bidding needed to support that very large number?
So part of it was a timing question. If he had come up, exact same player, exact same profile, exact same first start, because part of it was he looked so good in that first start, which obviously juiced the bids. It was early enough that a lot of teams still had money to bid. If he came up today, there just are not in take the NFBC main, but it's similar, and I would assume in almost every format in every single league. There just aren't the number of teams that have the same amount. And that's just the nature. Like if you look at the curve of how fab bids go over the season, it's the nature of those bids. When more teams are still engaged and have a lot of money, the bids are higher, regardless of the talent. So that's point one. Point two is, and I think we had an exchange on Twitter about this at the time. Mm-hmm. If you made the assumption, which was a reasonable assumption, but a risky assumption, that he was the best pitcher who was going to emerge in the player pool in 2021. And by that I mean, and I think, and it's not hindsight biased, I meant it at the time, there almost certainly will be a pitcher who at the end of the season has better stats than him. But in terms of projectability, in terms of foreseeability, so when you're bidding on the guy, that there was a reasonable assumption that Manoah was the best starting pitcher from a projections perspective who was going to emerge as free loot, to use the term, into the player pool, then I don't think that it's unreasonable to say that in an environment where a lot of teams, because of both injury and underperformance, needed real help in terms of a volume starting pitcher, that the best starting pitcher who was going to emerge probabilistically should get a 25, 30, 35, 40, even 40% bid, which doesn't mean that it wasn't an incredibly risky bid. As you suggest, he's a rookie pitcher. By definition, the range of outcomes are massive with that. So you need to weigh that against each other. But no, I don't think that if for the right team in the right context with the right amount of fab left, I think that like 538's obviously aggressive. But I don't think that it was an overbid without making any comment of how he's looked since then. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on where you are in the standing. You know, certainly if you're in 13th place out of 15, you're not going to jump up to second place if you don't have a spark. You know, the risk of a team needs to come up. You need to increase the risk. And certainly having Manoah on your team, as risky as he is, and with good projected stats, that certainly is someone to take a stab. If I'm in first place and I'm up by 10 points, I don't think I bid $300 on fab. I want to win the league by, I need a little bit of an expected value here, a little bit of expected value here, save some money for a closer emerging. I would not spend that much. I would spend maybe $150 to take a shot at them, but $300 is something else. But let me ask you a question, before I go to Ruvain, let me ask you a question again, Rob. You know, what if Luis Castillo comes available on the waiver wire? Or actually, we just had this, Ruben and I, in our league, Lucas Giolito, it was a 10-team league, but just came on the waiver wire. Some owner had enough of him and dropped him. Yeah, and the question is, what do you bid on that? We bid about 30% of our budget on Giolito there. So the winner put $55 down, and he's down to $2 in the league.
I mean, it's like... It's interesting. So in the NFBC, which is a totally different beast, and I know most people listening don't necessarily play in the NFBC, there are situations where Greg Ambrosius and Tom, who run the competition, will remove players from the free agent pool. And my guess, just because of collusion risk and
Right, right.
shifting the playing environment in competitions where there's an overall, if it's a standalone league, everybody go hard. But if there's an overall, there are situations where they will remove a player from the player pool, because it's like, why is somebody dropping Lucas Giolito? Like, it
Right,
doesn't
right.
make sense, even though he's obviously struggled for a little bit. Projections wise, he's still a top 15 pitcher. And if we're in a main event and you drop Lucas Giolito and I pick him up and I'm in competition for the overall, that certainly has the ability to shift the playing field.
Right.
So put that aside, because I assume that's not really in question in your
Right,
league
right, right,
of
right.
like collusion or funny business. May have been a bad decision, but that's not the
Correct.
issue. I think the analysis, to some extent, also, let's say you're in third place, second place, like you're right there and it's neck and neck. A lot of it is about blocking the teams that are in real contention with you. So I think it's one of those situations where you really need to create a spreadsheet of like, these are the teams who are really in it with me. These are the teams who can make up points in strikeouts and wins and in all the pitching categories. And as much as you want Lucas Giolito, it's also, what's a defensive bid to block the teams that I'm competing against without fully handicapping yourself, to make sure that you're safe. A lot of it also depends and on, can you make $0 bids. So in some leagues, you can bid $0 on players. So even if you're out of fab money, you can continue to make moves, though you're obviously hamstrung. You can't outbid anybody, but you can still make moves. In other leagues, the minimum bid is $1. Um, I don't want to be in a position on July 15th where I literally can only make two more moves all season, because injuries are going to happen. And even like, you really are in a tough spot at this point, even if you get Lucas Giolito, which is huge.
Right. Thoughts, Ruby?
Well, first of all, I think with the whole Alec Manoah thing, I think it's all a matter about timing and when he came up and what was going on in the league at the time. If you needed a pitcher, like let's say you had Tyler Glass now and he went down, you need that replacement. You know what? Go ahead, bid on it, do what you got to do if something like that comes up. And we also had an idea of how much people were going to be bidding on these players to begin with, because wasn't it the first or second week of the season when everyone bid like $200 on Julian Merriweather? And how did that work out? It was like it was the same thing all over again. So people had an idea of how much to spend or how much your league was going to spend on a certain top player that was coming up, and people had an idea that, you know what, if I do 250, I'm not going to get him for 250, and I really want him, so let me go a little higher. And then towards Sunday night, you're thinking, wait, I need to go a little higher, and that's how those bids creep up. And in the other league where Lucas Giolito was dropped, we were actually discussing earlier in the season, and I brought it up, of dropping Luis Castillo just to have other teams use their fab, because we didn't think he was going to turn it around. He has turned it around, and we've done better in the league since he's turned it around. But if you just throw him back into a league, in a home league like that, you don't know what someone's going to spend. They may spend the rest of their budget, and that will actually handicap them the rest of the way.
Boy, you're playing three-dimensional chess. Three-dimensional chess if you're dropping Luis Castillo in order to burn other people's fab. Like, that is, you're a better fantasy. No, I mean this. It's like, because
Well,
we've
he
all
wasn't doing
seen.
well either. He wasn't
No,
doing
no,
well either,
no.
so he'd hurt their
Total,
stats
total,
also.
Totally. Now, since June 1st, he's had a sub 2 ERA. He's been a
Right.
bit lucky, but he has turned around. But if you are so on top of your fantasy team that you're making drop decisions, not on the basis of, um, I don't want this guy anymore, I can't use this guy anymore, I need the roster spot, but you're making drop decisions on the basis of, I want to spend other people's fab money. We've all seen that happen in leagues, but boy, I'm just never on top of my team enough to be the guy who's playing that game. But if you can be, and I wonder, like I'm old and slow. Maybe other people are doing that, and that's amazing to me. If you're playing that level of chess in terms of your fantasy teams, that's
Well, it
amazing.
was it was it was a little bit more than that. Our ERA was shot. We just wanted to try to get as many wins and strikeouts. So what we were going to do is drop him and use two-star pitchers over and over again because we didn't think we were going to make up the ERA and WHIP. So Luis Castillo really didn't fit our team anymore. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I'm being, I'm
we ended up keeping him, and
Do you think there are people? Do you think there are people who play a game? It's like, here's a situation actually where I could see it happening.
but we do have
Let's say,
closers. Closers
well,
that do
that's what
that.
I was about to
Yeah.
say. Is let's say I lucked into Mark Melanson and like I hit I was at the track and I hit the whatever you call it. I hit the triple. I hit all three of the ponies in a row, and I'm 18 saves up at the All-Star break. Is it crazy in that scenario to drop a closer uh, so that everybody in the league goes crazy picking him up when I
Oh no.
know that nobody can catch me in saves? Like there's a 3% chance that Mark Melanson gets hurt and whatever happens, but otherwise I'm safe, and therefore I'm going to burn their fab dollars.
Oh no, absolutely, and that was exactly the what I thought of when you said that. We've done that where we've had 20 save lead, and we had 4 closers on the roster. We certainly weren't playing. We were going to plan on playing 2 every week, so might as well. We saw that you see who has the fab, and the person who had the fab wouldn't be able to catch us anyways, but might actually take away points from somebody else. Absolutely, that's definitely the right play.
Yeah, that's clever. And that's an obvious way to do it. It's way harder with position players because of just the multi-category nature of them and even starting pitchers. Like it's harder to do it with anybody other than closers. Maybe a stolen base specialist. Like if you had, there really aren't that many of them left. But in the day of the Billy Hamilton or the day of the Vince Coleman, that type of a player, if you had a massive stolen base lead, then that could work also in that
Right.
type of situation. Again, there really aren't that many of those players left anymore.
Correct. We'll talk a little bit more about closers, but I want to talk before about relief pitchers. Something that we do, and I want to get your take on it, is especially in the start of the season when you aren't really sure who the pitchers are and who's pitching well and who the better teams are that you don't want to face. You don't want to have a pitcher face their lineup. Instead of pitching a 7th or sometimes even a 6th starting pitcher among your 9, generally want to take a middle reliever, a good middle reliever that we're confident will just help our ratios and plug them in. There are many relievers who are worth value. This year, Andrew Kittredge is worth $11 in a 5x5 15-team roto. Giovanni Gallegos, who was almost the oddball out in the closer sweepstakes in St. Louis, he's worth $10. Paul Sewald is worth $6. Chad Green, who I have on every single team of mine, he's worth $5. I certainly wouldn't pay for any of these players in an auction or a draft. I'd take them in the reserve round or off of waivers for $1 or so. But do you do this kind of thing? Or are you interested in playing middle relievers instead of a 6th, a 7th starter?
For sure. I mean, you hit on one point. One is don't pay for last year's middle reliever, and anybody listening to this podcast knows that they're largely fungible, and they change, and the likelihood of the guy who was the good middle reliever last year being the good middle reliever next year is very low, and part of it is there's a weird psychology to it, I think, and it's a struggle a lot of us, maybe not you guys, but a lot of us have. Certainly I have, which is um, it's boring and it's risk management as opposed to upside chasing. But human nature is, my God, this guy has 2 starts. There's a possibility, therefore, by definition, of 2 wins in double-digit strikeouts, and this boring middle reliever has no scenario, we think, of those things happening. And we are very good as humans at chasing that upside and under appreciating the downside risk. And so that's point one. Point two, it takes time. So forget that you happened onto the good middle reliever in your reserve roster at draft season. Let's say it's Sunday afternoon and you're putting your free agent bids together. It takes a lot. It's very easy to sort by who has two starts next week. Let's see which of these two starts looks good or scary. I'm done. It takes a lot more time and effort to figure out who's the middle reliever who's likely to have a pretty good week next week, who's been good the last month, who hasn't pitched on Saturday, Sunday, and therefore has a higher likelihood of getting into games Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. So has the potential to maximize innings. It takes a lot more effort. And it's easy to say, well, but we all really, really care about our fantasy teams, but lots of us have families and lots of us have busy lives. It's harder to do it really well, I think. Like you list the guys who, with the benefit of hindsight, have done really well, but that doesn't mean what they're going to do well next week. And if you're projecting forward for next week on the middle relievers, because I think that it's a very viable strategy if you're very active and very aggressive to stream those middle relievers into a called the seventh pitching spot. But it's harder in so many ways than just streaming the two-start pitcher or streaming the guy who's facing Pittsburgh next week, right? Everybody knows that. Like that, there's 100 websites that will tell you who's facing the bad teams next week. There aren't 100 websites that will tell you who are the middle relievers who have been good the last 30 days but haven't pitched for 2 days. So it takes a lot more elbow grease to get there, and it's hard. And the upside is grinding over 26 weeks that spot, as opposed to, aha, I nailed that 2-week start. Look how smart I am. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah. No, definitely. But of course, things that are hard obviously remain an advantage if nobody
Pay off. It's a small. It's a. That's what, like, somebody like Jeff Zimmerman. Jokes off the top of the podcast aside, he's great at that. Like, he's really good at figuring out him and Tanner Bell. The reason they're doing so well, I think, is, like, Jeff is much bigger brain than I am on all sorts of, from big to small. So it's not to in any way minimize him, but he's putting in the work to find those, like, 50 cents a week edges. But as you know, 50 cents a week over 26 weeks is $13 for one roster spot. That is a massive advantage. That is literally the difference between, like, taking a 30th round pick and turning that player or that roster spot into a 9th, 10th round pick. And that's a huge advantage. If I told you in March, instead of a 30th round pick, you're going to get an extra 9th round pick, your eyes would light up and you'd say, my God, how am I going to lose this draft? That's massive. That's just 50 cents a week. It's like tiny little advantages add up to be so big. And I think that's why Jeff and Tan, there are other reasons. They're both very smart, sharp guys. But they're just putting in the work to find those little advantages.
And also in CBS 5x5, there are a couple pitchers who are in the top 30, middle relievers who are in the top 30 in value. You mentioned Gallegos. You mentioned Chad Green. Yusmeiro Petit has been very valuable. He doesn't get that many strikeouts. Every
year.
Devin Williams is his second year in a row. Craig Stammen, this is his second year in a row. But the guy who's standing out for me right now, and I think he's the unicorn. I think he's going to come back to earth. I think that's Ranger Suarez. He's got an ERA of .77, a whip of .74, 35 Ks in 35 innings. If he's available, he's a guy you should take because they don't have a closer.
Yeah.
They don't have a closer right now, and
he's the only guy who can get outs. He's the only guy who can get outs right now.
Right. Yeah. And he's a middle reliever, and if you would have picked him up 2-3 weeks ago and you're keeping track of this stuff, you could have got him for $1.
Yeah. And it's always good to get a guy the week before for buck than having to pay. One of my strategies for earlier this year is, a lot of people didn't want to stay away from Tampa relievers. Don't pick a Tampa reliever because they don't have a full share of the saves. You only get a quarter of the saves, you get a third of the saves, whatever it is. And I argued that was not great. I argued the other way. You're getting a great pitcher with great ratios, plus you're getting a quarter of the saves share. I argue the other way that it's more profitable, and for some leagues, you could have assembled 3 of the Tampa Bay Ray relievers, $1 each in the auction, and turned them into massive profit.
For sure.
Yeah. Want to talk a little bit about a question that came up, and Reuven and I have just an example, Richard Rodriguez of the Pirates, who everyone is saying, well, he's going to get traded. He's going to get traded. He's definitely the closer that's going to get traded. And should we pick up, someone who's available, who's a second guy, and with the assumption that, Rodriguez is not going to have any more saves? And my question to you is, I don't think that that's true. I think that there is a probability that he doesn't get traded, well, even if it's small. There's a probability that when he goes on another team, if he does, he still remains the closer. I mean, if he goes to the Phillies, maybe he's the guy. If he goes to the Blue Jays, which we'll talk about today, maybe he's the guy. Where do you see Richard Rodriguez in terms of having saves after the trade deadline?
Yeah, I think if you own Richard Rodriguez right now, you're nervous, and I own him in one of my leagues. You're nervous that he's going to lose the job. But what are you going to do about it? You can't drop the guy. Like, he's either going to have the job or not have the job. And if he doesn't have the job, he's not useless for all the reasons we just discussed. So I think you need to be eyes wide open that you have a risky closer. But to be fair, if you have a Aroldis Chapman right now, do you have a safe closer or a risky closer? Or do you not have a closer?
You have probably somewhere in the middle. I'd say more secure than you think because he's a Aroldis Chapman.
And I think so. So the nature of closers is just my point. Is this week you have a guy, next week you might not have a guy. So Rich Rodriguez, as of today, is on the higher risk end. Like, if we're using a red, orange, yellow, green type of color code, there's no doubt he's orange-ish in terms of like safe, on fire versus green, super safe. But what do you do about him? You're not dropping him. You're not like trading him on like pennies on the dollar. So be aware. And if there's another closing option to give you a third closer so you can kind of back up the saves and you have the roster spot, of course you should do it. But you should always be doing that. It's the nature of closers, right? Like, they're all risky until the season's over.
So, Reuven, if you had to put a probability on Richard Rodriguez that, assuming he's traded, now let's assume he is traded, what's the probability that he will still get the majority of save opportunities for the rest of the season?
I'm going to say 50-50. I think it's completely based on the team he's traded to. You mentioned the Blue Jays.
Sure, it is.
If he gets traded to the Rays, that's a bullpen by committee. He's going to still get saves. If he goes, but no one gets all the saves on the Rays. If he goes to Oakland right now, they have basically a split there for saves. He's going to be in that mix also. What happened 2 years ago when everyone had Shane Green and he had all those saves for the Tigers? He was traded to the Braves. Did he not get any more saves down the stretch? No, he did. His numbers stayed the same though. He was getting the same amount of strikeouts. His ERA and WHIP stayed the same, and he threw in a couple of saves there. So he's still valuable like a middle reliever. So there's no reason to drop him, but you're not going to get the same amount of saves later. So just like Rob said, you got to go and look and scour the waiver wire and see if you can get another potential closer. And there are always potential closers available on the wire.
What's your probability, Rob, of if he gets traded that he remains the majority saves guy?
A little bit lower than 50%, just because 50% feels, no disrespect, like the cop out. I'd say it's at least 40% that he gets. So let's say over under 10 saves the rest of the season, given that we're a bit more than half. I say that's a pretty good Vegas line, and it's like I'd be torn in terms of where to bet that because it could go either way.
I put this poll on Twitter. 50% of the people said he's going to get 30% chance or less. 33% said between 30 and 50, and only about 15% said he's going to get more than it's a more than 50% probability. I think that our Twitter followers probably are a little bit on the aggressive side of he's not getting the closer. He's not going to be the closer, not going to get saves. But yeah, I get your point. I would vote with you, Rob, somewhere a little bit less than 50 or so. The question also comes up, especially this year, and NFBC has no IL slots. You have to make decisions on whether to keep injured players or not. You have to make a decision on, can I take a couple of swings? Can I throw some darts at some potential closers? Right? You may or may not have the space to do it. How do you balance your injuries with potential closer darts and also with picking up streamers for the week? How do you manage your roster in terms of balance of spots?
This week's a really good week to have been able to be in a position to pick up one or two quote unquote darts, just because for the vast majority of teams, they haven't announced who's pitching Friday, Saturday, Sunday yet. So it's like the first week of the season again, having an extra reliever or two who may or may not be the closer. Having a guy who has the potential to pitch is better than having dead roster spots. And lots of us are going to be going into this weekend with dead roster spots when the rosters, like when the rotations get announced. But that's really easy to say if you're in a position where you have Mike Trout on your bench and you're in a position where you have, name any of 30 injured guys on your bench, then you're yelling at this podcast right now and saying, Rob, that's awesome. So I'm supposed to drop Trout for a middle reliever? And it's like, no, you should not drop Mike Trout for a middle reliever. So it's wicked tough. It's really, really tough. And those are the trade-offs. And it's like, it's easy to say you got to be a week ahead and get the guy for $1 instead of $100 after he has the closer's job. But you can't cut Mike Trout.
Yep. And in labor, we picked up David Bednar and Anthony Bender on the waiver wire this week. For that reason, hopefully that works out in us fending off the aforementioned Jeff Zimmerman. Ruvain, any thoughts as to how you deal with the roster crunch this year?
Well, dealing with it is very, very tough because of all the injuries, but we actually have Rich Rodriguez on one of our teams. And I actually posed the question, should we drop him and pick up a dart for him? Because if we don't think he's going to get the majority of the saves for whatever team he goes to, that's a roster spot that I can use for darts. We ended up coming to the decision that we're going to keep him because he still could get saves at least for another week or two and possibly beyond, so we didn't do that. But it's just so hard to be able to do this at this point. However, after the All-Star break, there are going to be a lot of players coming off the IL, which means that a lot more players are going to be available because teams are going to have to start dropping their replacements. So you might be able to see more of those darts on the waiver wire in the next couple weeks just because of that reason.
Rich Rodriguez is more likely to get saves the rest of the season than any free agent you could have picked up this week. Almost certainly.
It depends. I mean, we're in a 10-team league. There are
sure. I mean NFBC.
Correct.
I think dropping. I hear the strategy that you were articulating. I think that's 2 degrees too cute. Dropping Rich Rodriguez a week before he might be traded, hoping that you could get a potential closer, because it's just probabilistically, I don't think that, my gut is that's not the right decision.
Well, we were thinking about picking up Bednar instead of him because we were thinking Bednar would get
Ruvain, we were thinking of picking up Emmanuel Clase, who was on the waiver.
Well, that's
wire.
different.
Yeah, that's different. Like fair enough. In a 10-team league, there's always weird things that could be going on.
But even in a 12-team or 15-team, if David Bednar is available and you think he's going to close, that's not a horrible strategy, because who's going to get more saves down the stretch, David Bednar or Rich Rodriguez?
Yeah, fair enough. It always is league specific.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the Toronto Blue Jays.
Sure. Let's fire through the Jays questions.
Yeah. So we're talking about closers, and I'll read you the save leaders this year. Romano,
Yes.
7, Dolis, 3, Merriweather, 2, and a bunch of guys, Castro, Chatwood, Malone, A.J. Cole, all with 1. What is the closer situation in your mind? Do you think that if the Jays trade for a closer, which is probably in their best interest, will they pick up the lion's share of the save-ops? I mean, if Craig Kimbrell gets traded, Rodriguez gets traded, is that a good decision? Will that happen? So obviously, when you're playing fantasy, and you have to think about that question.
So here is the Jays' bias, and they've been very honest about it from the start of the season till now. They would like their best pitchers to pitch in high leverage situation. They want to run a Tampa type bullpen. The problem is they haven't had the arms to be able to do it. They've had brief, like there were 3 days when Merriweather was there. There was spring training when Kirby Yates was healthy, but they haven't had the arms to do it. That being said, there are one of two ways I think the Blue Jays bullpen goes at the trade deadline. Option one is they trade for a capital C closer. So they trade for Craig Kimbrell, they trade for Rich Rodriguez, they trade for Brad Hand, they trade for somebody else who I'm not considering right now who is put on the market, and they trade for that guy who is clearly the closer. And I think the Blue Jays would be thrilled to be in a position where they can then use Romano as the high leverage, whether it's the 6th inning, 7th inning, 8th inning, or 9th inning, but they will go with 80% of the time. If they have Craig Kimbrell on the roster, he will get 95% of the saves, like any other team, like he is with the Cubs. Rich Rodriguez, 90% of the team. Brad Hand, I'm not a huge Brad Hand fan, but 85-90% of the time. So that's option one, and I think there's a decent chance they pulled the trigger on that kind of trade. Option two, if like the asking price is just too high, is what I would call, I don't like my card, so I'm going to flip the table over, which is the Jays bullpen right now is a disaster. So they're going to bring in 4 different pitchers who are not on the roster right now, none of whom are Craig Kimbrell or Brad Hand or the closer. But they're going to recreate their bullpen. And from a fantasy perspective, like it'll make the Jays way better. They will pick up really good arms, none of whom are the closer. And Romano will stay as the mostly closer. And I think that is the more likely scenario, is they're going to pick up volume of decent arms. What is the likelihood of the two things happening? I'd say 30-35% that they get a capital C closer, 65%, so 2/3 kind of thing, that they get a bunch of pretty good arms that make them a better team. But from a fantasy perspective, the closer situation is mostly how it is right now, with a bunch of different decent guys mixed in, maybe a situational lefty here. If Romano's pitched 2 days in a row, throw it in, but they don't pick up the big name closer. And I don't think they feel the need to pick up the big name closer. There is no doubt they need to recreate the bullpen. It is the reason that they're not right there for the division lead or certainly the wild card. The bullpen has been a disaster for Toronto this year.
Yeah, definitely agree. Great analysis there. I have nothing to add. Anything to add, Ruvain?
Yeah, I'm going to add about Julian Merriweather. People are waiting for him. He actually had a setback last week with his left oblique, so he's not coming back anytime soon. And I agree with Rob. They can do what the Braves did in 2019 when they did pick up Shane Green. They picked up Will Smith just to protect around Mark Melancon because they didn't know what they had with him because he wasn't really pitching that well toward the mid part of the season. So that would be the better way to go. If they can just make the game shorter, that's the best idea for them.
The only thing I'd say about Merriweather, as electric as his arm is, if you're in a dynasty league and somebody has dropped him in your dynasty league or keeper league, maybe you take a flyer if you have the spot. if Vegas has the over/under in innings pitched for Merriweather for the rest of the season at 1 inning, I will take the under on that. I'd love to be wrong, but I don't know that we see Merriweather pitch another inning this season, which is a shame because he really is tremendous when he's healthy, but not so much.
Well, Rob, what do you think the Blue Jays' other needs are in terms of trades, and what do you think they're actually going to go for? Are they going to add a star? Certainly, their lineup is amazing. Are they going to go and add some starting pitching depth?
I think, and it'll surprise people, I think there's another bat coming to the team. And it's either going to be a third baseman or an outfielder. Defensively, they do not have a player right now who is Kevin Biggio is an interesting, good player. He's not a full-time defensive third baseman. Bo Bichette might be a defensive third baseman. He's not quite a defensive shortstop. They're not moving Bo off of shortstop, though, this year. So, like, who could that be? Well, your beloved New York Mets are talking about Chris Bryant. Would it shock me if the Blue Jays traded for Chris Bryant? It would not shock me. Would it shock me if Joey Gallo is on the Blue Jays as a left-handed bat? That's the other problem with the Blue Jays lineup. As good as the lineup is, it's very righty focused. So would it shock me if Joey Gallo is in the Blue Jays lineup on Friday of this week? Would not shock me. So we say as fantasy players hearing that, it's like, Rob, you're making no sense because who's not playing then? There's too many bats. It's like, that. How's this going to work? And I remind you, this is how they tried to set up the team going into this year. They wanted one too many bats. They wanted to rotate guys through the DH spot, through a day on the bench. And I don't think and Randall Grichuk, he's a great fantasy player because of what you paid for him. So he's a very profitable fantasy player. That's different from saying he's necessarily a player who needs to be playing every day in real baseball terms. So I think there's another bat coming. I think there's either an outfielder or a third baseman still going to be added to this lineup beyond just fixing the bullpen.
Would they dare go after someone like Josh Donaldson again and have him back, or did he wear his welcome there?
I love Josh Donaldson. I don't think I don't know anything about. None of us know anything about it. I don't think they like Josh Donaldson in that clubhouse with those kids. I don't think they like that. But what do I know about the internal dynamics about those things? I often joke about, because I love Nelson Cruz. Wouldn't it be great to have Nelson Cruz on the Jays? I think they want to be flexible in terms of the DH spot. So I don't think it's a Nelson Cruz. I think it's a guy. I think Joey Gallo's interesting to them because of position flexibility, because he has shown he can play at least a mediocre all three outfield positions and third base. And I think that interests them. Chris Bryant is interesting because he has shown he can play third base and the outfield. So I think they treasure, per modern baseball, that kind of flexibility. And what does that mean for us as fantasy players? It means more chaos. It doesn't mean more chaos if you own Vlad. It doesn't mean more chaos if you own Bichette. Like, those guys, Simeon is going to play every day. Springer, when healthy, is going to play probably now that he's kind of, hopefully the injuries are in the past, every day. But for the other guys, it means a bit more chaos, which means a bit fewer plate appearances. The flip side is, as this always happens, it'll work itself out. It'll be okay. Like, it's not so you're saying I should drop Grichuk or I should drop Biggio. It's like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't be shocked if there's a bit of chaos in the world in the next couple of weeks.
And of course, nobody is going to get hurt for the rest of the season on the Blue Jays.
Of course not.
Nobody.
Like it's the nature of baseball, guys. Like, we all know this. We've all seen this. It will work out, and therefore, if I'm running the Jays and I can get a bit more depth, so I'm covered on the eventuality of player X getting hurt, I have to do it.
Right. So, side note on Chris Bryant, Ruvain thinks that 2 of 3, Chris Bryant, Craig Kimbrell, and Kyle Hendricks is coming to the Mets. But let's see if that happens.
It's as if you guys have been listening to New York sports radio or something.
No. I'm basing it.
I'm just joking, guys.
I'm basing on the fact that they got Carrasco together with Lindor, so that's how the general managers were thinking at the time. So
there
they
you go.
to combine those.
Package them together.
Right.
Exactly.
Makes
and
sense.
Get the contracts off. Yeah.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
but you mentioned Randall Grichuk. I want to talk a little bit about him. If you're thinking that he might lose a little bit of playing time, let's say, if to talk about his fantasy value, so far he's been amazing. 259 average, 16 homers, 57 RBIs, second most on the team in RBIs. Last year he led the team. He's a $17 player in Roto. That is sneaky valuable. I mean, I've been all over Grichuk for the last couple of years. He's a much better fantasy player than real life player. He's only at 100 WRC plus, 0.5 WAR. He's just an average player in real life, but in fantasy, with the counting metrics, with the runs and the RBIs, he just does it. Going forward, what are your expectations for him? And maybe we can play a little bit of a rankings game here with him. Going forward, would you rather have Randall Grichuk or a guy like Brian Reynolds?
Ooh. If you could tell me what team Brian Reynolds is Brian Reynolds.
Right.
Well, no. I mean, we talked about this on Launch Angle. Reynolds has been tremendous, but his counting stats on the Pirates are hard capped. If he's on the Yankees as their starting left fielder, and hitting sixth in the Yankees lineup, that could change the world really quickly. So, it's so context dependent. I think the Jays really like Randall Grichuk as a 3.5 outfielder, if that makes sense. And they're content with him as a third outfielder because he really is a league average player. And look at the Cleveland Indians. They desperately need 4 other Randall Grichuks, right? It's easy to say, and it sounds like a pejorative. He's just a league average hitter. And it's like, yeah, that's not as easy to find as you may think. It's really not. And again, from fantasy perspective, Randall Grichuk, given the cost, and it's been multiple years now, has been a tremendous return. So the game we care about, don't take it like I'm poo-pooing on Randall Grichuk too hard. You're not dropping Randall Grichuk even in any format where you have him right now until there is a fundamental change. Don't say Rob Silver said I should get rid of. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just warning you, be aware and pay attention to the Jays lineup week to week. I will not be surprised if Randall Grichuk starts losing some playing time, even without a trade down the stretch a little bit.
Yep. Ruvain, would you rather take Reynolds or Grichuk rest of season?
I'd probably rather take Reynolds just because of playing time. Because right now he's still in Pittsburgh. He's playing. You don't know where he's playing. He's playing in the All-Star game.
He can
today.
go to
That's
a better
where he's
lineup
right now.
He can go to a better lineup.
Yeah, that's a much better lineup. But I think he will get. I don't think the Pirates are going to do a wholesale trade. I don't think they're going to trade both Adam Frazier and Brian Reynolds. I just can't see that happening. I think he's going to stay on the team. His stats are capped, like you said, because he's just on a bad team. But even bad teams have to score some runs. So I think I'd rather have Brian Reynolds just because of the assured playing time. And that's the whole reason why Randall Grichuk is so valuable. No one thought to start the season that Grichuk would get so much playing time because of the crowded outfield in Toronto. But look what happened. Injuries happen, and that's why you need that 3.5 or 4th outfielder.
All right, Rob, how about similar player Hunter Renfroe? Would you rather have Grichuk or Renfroe rest of the season?
I don't understand. Maybe I don't own Renfroe anywhere. I don't fully understand Renfroe. I think I'd rather Randall Grichuk, to be honest.
Okay.
I don't understand Hunter Renfroe. That's a lazy, ignorant take. I just don't understand who he is and how he fits on that team. Is the honest answer. I don't get him. So there are certain players I'm willing to accept. I don't have a good enough take on him Whereas I think Randall Grichuk, I have a handle on what he is and what he isn't.
I think he's a lot of power. I think that in
No,
points
I know
leagues,
that.
in points leagues, I might take Renfro over Grichuk because he should get some standard playing time, whatever he's been getting, and that plays a little bit more. The power plays more in points leagues. I might do that.
Yeah, I think I'd rather have Grichuk also. I think where it's close, you want to take about comparable what your needs are. Something like Andrew McCutchen. His batting
Ooh,
average is batting 228 on the season. He's got
yeah.
a lot of power, but he also throws in a stolen base here and there. So I think that's a better comp.
Yeah.
Rob, who would you rather have rest of the season? Andrew McCutchen and his old and barking knees, or Randall Grichuk?
I think Kutch, because as big a mess in some ways as Philadelphia is, I think he's going to stick around, and I think he's going to grind out the stats. I think end of season he will end up with more fantasy dollar value than Grichuk. I think he's going to survive despite the barking knees.
I'll do two more of these comps. How about Max Kepler?
Um, so tough because when I think of the future of the Minnesota Twins outfield, um, like I don't know if you guys are Byron Buxton fans, believers, apologists, been burned 42 times,
We're risk
or
averse here, so
so you've
stay.
avoided them each time.
Yeah.
So if I'm thinking about the Minnesota Twins for next season, opening day 2022, I really like Trevor Larnach in terms of what I've seen from him, and I'm very intrigued and interested in Alex Kirilloff. And I think that if I'm the Minnesota Twins, it's like I need to find out what these guys are, who these guys are, and give them a lot of runway. And by definition, anytime Byron Buxton is healthy enough to play in a baseball game, which may not happen again this season, I have to play Byron Buxton. So the question is, where does and like who knows what Nelson Cruz's future is in Minnesota? But until Nelson Cruz is not on the Minnesota Twins, Nelson Cruz is your everyday DH. And you have this Luis Arias guy who's kind of a freaky player and a very unusual player. So I just don't know. And let's be honest, Max Kepler also is another guy who's been a very good fantasy player in many ways for a lot of ways. But it's not like if you start sitting Max Kepler against tough lefties or batting him like every day seventh or eighth in the lineup, that people are crying out, I can't believe you're doing this to Max Kepler. So I don't know what Max Kepler's future is looking like, and I don't know that there's any real trade value for Max Kepler. So I don't know where Max Kepler fits in the baseball universe right now, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think I'd rather take Gurriel. Sorry, my last guy I was going to say is Gurriel is the next question, but I'd rather take a Grichuk than Kepler. Do you
Actually,
disagree?
I'd rather take Kepler. Kepler has raised his batting average over 25 points in the last 3 weeks, so I think he may have found something. The All-Star break stopped it, but I've always been a big Max Kepler fan. I had him when he first came up, and I've been following him, and I think he will turn it around. And a lefty in that lineup, when he's between a couple of big boppers there, it's a good place for him.
I'm not anti Max Kepler, just so I'm clear. I just think that Kirilloff and Larnach have to play every day. Like it doesn't make sense otherwise when you're 40
Right.
games out of first place or whatever the Twins are right now. So I do worry about Kepler losing out to some extent.
And the last person I want is teammate Lourdes Gurriel Jr. Would you rather
Uh,
have?
I think Lourdes is going to have a huge second half. So it's
Yeah.
not even close. Nothing he's done in the first half has fundamentally changed who I thought he was going into the season. I was wrong about Gurriel because I was super high on Gurriel, but I still think on a going forward basis, Gurriel is a very good hitter, and I think
Yep.
he'll have a very nice end of the season.
Yeah, and I mentioned
Agreed.
him last week as my undervalued player heading into the second half. I think Gurriel is poised. He's already doing it. He's been doing it since mid-May,
Yeah,
really.
he has,
And
and it's the nature of if he was doing what he did in June, early July, in April, everybody would be hyped about Gurriel and would have missed the slump, his April move to June. Like it's just the nature of the stacking of months in a baseball season. If you start off hot, it takes a long time for people to realize you've cooled off. If you start off cool, it takes a long time for people to realize that you've heated up. He's been very good for the last 6 weeks.
yep, absolutely. Last Jay's question, catching. They had sometimes had three catchers on the roster here. Jansen, you got Kirk, McGuire. What is your take on how the catcher's playing time will split down the stretch? And are any of these catchers really viable in one catcher leagues, two catcher leagues? What do you think?
So the only catcher who is viable, who not viable, like if you're in a 15 team two catcher league, there's a lot of catchers who are bad who are on rosters. But Alejandro Kirk projects as one of the top 10 hitting catchers on a per plate appearance
Yes.
basis. And that has been the case from all winter and all season, and it's the case today. The challenge is if the denominator of how many plate appearances he gets is zero, it doesn't matter what he's doing on a per plate appearance basis. And unfortunately for Alejandro Kirk, I think as of today, unless something changes, he's not getting plate appearances. Like I don't think he's opening the second half of the post All-Star break on the roster. I think he's going to have to play in AAA for a while and get hot or have an injury before he gets playing time. What's interesting for the Jays is Gabriel Moreno, who is a top 10 prospect for them as well, is in Double A right now, and his Double A hitting, he has a 192 WRC plus in Double A right now. So he's theoretically the fifth catcher in the system. So they're in a weird position. Like I don't play in a lot of dynasty leagues, but I know enough about dynasty leagues to know there's really no such thing as catcher prospects because they break your heart and they always end up sucking, no matter how good you think they are. But they may go into next season when we start seeing the steamer and all the other projection models with two of the top like 12 or 14 projected hitting catchers, and something's going to have to give. And I'm not suggesting that like Danny Jansen has trade value, but the team, the management knows Alejandro Kirk's bat is a special bat. Like he really is. He's a good hitter, and he's not as bad a defensive catcher as people stereotype him to be. And Gavin Marino is a really good catcher. Now he's not 21 yet. He's really young, but he's going to be beating on the door next season. So like things are going to have to move, and catcher has been a rough spot obviously for the Jays. So I don't know how it plays out. What I know is Kirk is a tough stash for almost everybody in redraft leagues. Like unless you have unlimited IL slots, it's really hard to hold a third catcher. Never mind a third catcher who may never really get the playing time, but there's no such thing as league winning catchers. Like he's not going to win you your league, but he does have the potential to in 2 months do more statistically than almost any catcher in baseball. So if you have the room, it's worth it. But I just caution you, the high probability is it's going to be very frustrating playing time for a while
Hmm.
for Kirk.
Is there any catcher in a even in the NFBC two catcher 15 team league that if they go on the IL, you should for a good month, you shouldn't cut right away, other than Real Muto and Perez?
Um, it's really touch and go for like the next tier down. I think the I think the better
Mid-season already.
way, yeah, like I think the better way to play it, um, is it's, play it just like I played it. Let me tell
And
you.
by the way, to
So,
interrupt you, Real Muto just homered, by the way, in the All-Star
oh,
game.
there you go. See, this is what people are looking for. So I like Mitch Garver. I've always had a soft spot since the big breakout season for Mitch Garver. I think Mitch Garver is probably coming back in the next week to 10 days. So it's not. I didn't hold Mitch Garver. I didn't have Mitch Garver. I picked up Mitch Garver in a couple of leagues this Sunday, and as a third catcher. So it's not that I'm holding three catchers, but I'm willing to go a week with
Right.
three catchers because I think Mitch Garver could be back. Like, it wouldn't shock me if he's back for
Right.
Friday. And my expectation is he will not be, but sometime next week, Mitch Garver will be back. And he's a big enough improvement over my second catcher in those leagues that for a week to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, holding that third catcher in Mitch Garver is worthwhile, which is different than what your actual question was.
And just a quick mention on Alejandro Kirk. His manager already, Charlie Montoya, already said he's 100% healthy. He's been in rehab games. He's gone 5 for 13 with a homer, a double, 4 walks, and 3 RBIs in 5 rehab games. So he is ready when they are ready. But I have a question to you, and let's see how you feel about this. Alejandro Kirk versus Travis d'Arnaud. D'Arnaud's supposed to come back, let's say, second week in August. Who's going to have more fantasy value? Who do you think will have more fantasy value from here until the end of the season?
I would pick Kirk for two reasons. One, I think he is a better hitter, which is not necessarily an indictment of d'Arnaud. And two, Kirk is healthy. So d'Arnaud, the day he's healthy, will have a job, or at least a percentage of a job. They presumably will not play him every single day right off the bat. Um, but it's a catcher and it's a serious injury. Like, you know this better than I do. Early August could easily turn into mid-August and late August. So like, if he only has 4 to 6 weeks, Kirk, I think, can get more plate appearances the rest of the season. More certainly, like there's a higher percentage chance that Kirk gets to 100 plate appearances the rest of the season than d'Arnaud, I think, because there's a better chance that d'Arnaud gets 0.
That's true. Okay.
All right, let's finish off with a little bit of over-under. Maybe you can give a player or two who you believe is overvalued and who is undervalued heading into the second half. We mentioned Gurriel before as undervalued. Do you have another player or so for each?
I'll go for an overvalued player. I'll stick with the Jays just because
All right.
that was the theme. A guy I'm really worried about is Hyunjin Ryu, and I love Ryu. He's been so good for the Jays for the most part since he came to Toronto. Something ain't right with him though. Ryu, the last 6 weeks has been a bad pitcher. And I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know if he's tired. Or I don't know if he's just in a bad funk. And my hope as a Jays fan is it just kind of fixes itself and Ryu comes out of the break, having had maybe a couple extra days rest, and is back to being who he had been before. But if I own Ryu in if you own Ryu in fantasy, you've seen what's been happening, and it really hasn't been good at all, at all, at all. So I'm really worried about Ryu. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, I own him in TGFBI. Question is, what do? You can't drop him right now.
Of course you're not dropping him.
Do you sit him? I'd say for really bad matchups, you do. For medium matchups, how can you not play him? It's a 15-team league.
Yeah. So since August 1st, he has a 5.13 K per nine, a 3.35 walk per nine, and a 5.72 FIP. That's not what you were hoping for, but it's the nature. So the optimist in me says it's the nature of baseball seasons. There's ups, there's downs. His fastball velocity isn't down that much, so it's not like there are flashing red flags of injury, like he's hiding an injury. It's not that. He's just sucked.
Yeah. All right. Hey, you want to give another undervalued player?
Undervalued player on the Jays is again. I don't know that this is actionable for anybody. Is George Springer? Springer's about to go off.
Yeah.
He's going to be moved back into the leadoff spot. I think real soon. I think Simeon's going to be dropped down in the lineup, and Springer's going to go towards the top. Simeon's batting average, just on base, has been the power is cleaned up for him, and I've loved. He's been well. What a blessing it's been to watch him play. Simeon's been wonderful.
Yeah.
But so I think Springer. If you're in a trading league and people have forgotten that Springer is a legit top 20-25 hitter in baseball when healthy, if people are selling him as a top like 60-70 hitter instead of a top 20-25 hitter, then I'd pay a premium to get Springer as the top, maybe not top 20 hitter anymore, but top 30-40 hitter. Like if there's an arbitrage there, if there's a delta between where people see him right now because of the first half and who his true talent still is, I would buy every Springer share I could get my hand on if that's where people value him.
Strong advice there. On to the injury section here, the injury update from Ruvain. And actually, a mailbag question comes to you, Ruvain. Maybe you can start with that. Russell Koch asks, hey, is there any update on Ketel Marte? Maybe you can give that update as well as any others you have prepared for us today.
Sure, I'll start with Ketel Marte. On July 3rd, he actually, or around the July 4th weekend, he actually had a live batting practice session, but he still is not running. So it's very hard to say when he's going to come back because this is his second stint on the IL for his hamstring issue. People thought that he wasn't going to be out this long, but you know what? Hamstrings are very fickle things, and if this can last for weeks if he doesn't get right away, and he uses his legs especially in the outfield. He's not playing second base anymore, and that can be a big issue. Other guys who are going to be coming back soon, either in the last week in July or the very beginning of August, people to look out for, or last couple weeks in July, Mark Canha. Eloy Jimenez, he's looked very good. Mike Trout, the soonest he can come back is July 17th. Lorenzo Cain should be coming back right after the All-Star break. Tommy La Stella is going to be coming back. Carlos Carrasco, they may actually build up his innings in the Mets rotation. J.D. Davis is supposed to be activated for the Mets at this first day back. Alex Bregman should be coming back hopefully in about a week or two. But a couple of guys that I'm a little bit more very not upset that they're not going to be able to play. Corey Kluber, they said he's likely out until September he still has that subscapularis injury, which is the same type of injury that Shane Bieber has. And they're saying September, and Shane Bieber actually was injured 3 weeks after Kluber, so I'm a little bit concerned with that. And I gotta mention Ronald Acuna, who's been one of the top outfielders. He is done for the year. He will be okay. He should be okay for the start of the spring training. He will have the ACL surgery. He actually said he was going to go to the All-Star game to push off the surgery a little bit. That shouldn't matter. He should be ready for opening day next year.
Can I ask you that question? And I know we've run like an hour and a half long. So the big debate this winter about Acuna is going to be, will he run when he comes back? Will he play it safe or will he run? And Acuna is obviously a tremendous hitter if he doesn't steal a single base. But if you're considering first round picks next year, then it matters tremendously whether Acuna runs. Do you have any sense post ACL? We have lots of football players who've come back. Baseball is obviously different. What the likelihood that his speed and comfort of running is likely to be coming off that kind of an injury? And I'm sorry to put you on the spot here.
No, it's fine. He's actually a very aggressive player to begin with, so I think he's going to try to push it sooner than later. But I mean, it's not the same injury. But Christian Yelich has the broken kneecap, and he was out for an extended period of time also. It's the same idea. Christian Yelich only has 6 stolen bases this year. Am I going to think that Acuna's going to lose all of his stolen bases? No, he'll still be a 20 to 25 stolen base guy, possibly. But I think it's going to take a while for him to get confidence and to be able to run. And once he has that confidence, he is a crazy fast guy. He'll take the extra base. He's just a very aggressive player to begin with. So I think he's going to push it. Would I take him at number 1 next year? No. Would I take him at number 2, 3, 4? I still take him probably in the top 10. He's still going to give you the power. The speed will come. So I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah, I just think it's going to be a debate we're going to have all winter in terms of what to do with Acuna.
I mean, isn't he going to be a very similar situation as to Mike Trout? Mike Trout, well, Trout doesn't run anymore. He'll only get 10 stolen bases this year. I would think that if I was going to predict ADP for next year, I would think it'd be very close to where Trout is. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think I think there's two questions with Acuna. The first is timing. Is he ready for opening day? Like, does he get at least a few weeks of spring training and ready for opening day, or is he delayed into like a May 1st type of situation? Obviously, by definition, if he's not ready for opening day, we can all do the math and fill in. It's not that he drops that far because he's still tremendous, and you can backfill for his stats, but that obviously has an impact. And then two, it's the stolen bases. He's much younger than Mike Trout. He's much closer to a big stolen base total than Mike Trout. And again, I'm not a medical expert, so correct me if anything I'm saying is wrong. My sense of an ACL injury is it's not that it's a simple injury it's not a shoulder injury where recurrence is there's a big risk of recurrence. Once he's healthy, he should be pretty healthy. Like, and the likelihood of a recurrence of the injury is relatively low. Is that fair?
Yes, it is. I mean, I think it was Adrian Peterson. Didn't he have an ACL injury with the Minnesota Vikings? And then he came back and he's older and he was running just as fast and just as hard as he was when he was before the injury. So, and he's older. So the age does play a difference. Acuna is younger. So because of that, he's going to heal better. And I think he'll be more aggressive. Although the Braves may tell him to just calm it down because
Totally.
they need him
You're
in
too
the
important.
lineup.
You're too important. Totally.
Exactly.
Anyways, we have all next winter to think about that. Unfortunately, we don't have to think about Acuna between now and then. Unfortunately, because it's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah, of course, and the discussion is going to be, well, if we think he's going to steal, then it's a buying opportunity. Otherwise, if we don't, it's a risk, and it's going to be that's going to be the discussion in the offseason, absolutely. You know what? I'm not settled on Tatis is not a risk for the rest of this year. I think that
we were talking about this on the launch angle today. We were talking about Tatis versus Ohtani, and Jeff mentioned it's like, look, I still worry about injury risk for Ohtani, and I'm like, it's crazy to me. Like I said, I don't disagree with what you just said, but it's crazy to me how Tatis went from, my God, look at that shoulder injury, he's done, to he's awesome, he's the man. It's like, I assume that shoulder can pop out at any second. We all hope it doesn't
and he
happen.
Changes swing.
I have no reason.
Mid-season.
Totally. And he's
Crazy.
so young and so talented and in such good shape. Like, there's lots of reasons to think he should be just fine. But it's just funny how these things go from, like, my God, he's never going to walk again, to he's the bionic man in an instant.
Let me ask you a question. Funny. Here, sorry we're going over here, but would you take rest of season Tatis or Mookie Betts in 5x5 Roto?
I think Tatis, like, the upside is just it's I mean, it's a floor upside question to some extent, but even the floor, but like, Tatis is just too good. I can't not take Tatis.
And
do you disagree?
You can't not take somebody because you think they're going to get hurt again. That's not how drafts work. Otherwise, you wouldn't take anybody in a draft.
And it's because it's not like Mookie Betts hasn't had injury. Like, Mookie Betts can twist an ankle tomorrow, for sure. Tatis, as far as we know today, is healthy. He's playing at a level. If he is playing hurt right now, then he is playing at a higher level hurt than 99.9% of Major League Baseball players have ever played before, right? Like, he's playing at such an insane level. Moreover, projections would say, not to just fall back on projections, that Tatis is Tatis and Vlad, but from a fantasy perspective, Tatis is the best fantasy player right now with Acuna down. So I love Mookie Betts. Mookie Betts is awesome, but I think it's Tatis.
Yeah, he's at a different world. And, obviously it's been a couple of months that he has been back. That first month back, I think if somebody offered me Mookie Betts for Tatis, and I do not have any Tatis shares, but if I did, I might have taken it, only because it's so risky at the very top. I mean, you never know. All right. Well, anyways, this was a fantastic show, Rob. Really appreciate you coming on. And before I let you go, could you, just tell everybody, where we can follow you, where we can, a little bit about Launch Angle Podcast and anything else that's going on with you right now?
No, nobody wants to follow. If you're following me already, I apologize. This was fun. I'm sorry for hijacking your show, and surely after this, Sporer will never allow me back on another Fangraph podcast.
Now we see why. Now we see why.
Now you fully
understand.
understand.
This is great.
Now you fully understand.
Next time we'll talk about my softball team that I play second base on, but we'll get to that next time.
There you go. And the dirty double plays that you've been churning, like you just some dirty play out at second base.
You don't want to know.
There you go. Anyways, this was great fun, guys. Be well.
Awesome. You can follow Rob Silver at Rob Silver, and you can listen to him on the Launch Angle Podcast. Ruben, you want to tell everybody where we can see you?
Yes. You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come in, who's up next, how long I think they're going to be out based on my medical opinion, and you can also catch my weekly article at Rotoballer.
All right, you can read my work over at Fangraphs. You can follow me at ATCNY. Coming up later this week, we're actually going to have a couple of ex-ball players on the show. Stick around for that, a couple of bonus episodes, and Fred Zinke next week. We've really got some great shows in the next couple of weeks here, so stay tuned here on Beat the Shift. All right, from all of us here, thank you, Rob Silver, for coming on. From Ruben and I, have a wonderful All-Star break. See you on the other side.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.